call some old phone numbers, and I'll throw a party for a start. I've made a vow, it's all over now.
Serving Lawrence County since 1951. This is WDXE Lawrenceburg, a broadcast service of Prospect Communications.
And we are live with our 5 to 6 o'clock hour, and our special guests today are 8 Oaks Recovery Center. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing well. This is all y'all.
Good. Hey, I'm Jared Menz, and I work with 8 Oaks Recovery Center.
Oh, sorry, that was a little loud.
We are a Christian drug rehab program serving men in the Lawrence County community, and we're going to have a show this evening, and we're going to talk to folks about addiction. If people want to call in and ask questions, we're more than happy to do that and talk about the issues of drug addiction in our society today.
Hey, Jared, I'm glad you had me on here. Being the chairman of the Republican Party, we get to talk about some things that are actually going to impact the taxpayers of Lawrence County and the state of Tennessee. And I also need to plug our meeting tonight while we're talking about this. At 6 o'clock, we're going to have Richard Archie from the Tennessee Firearms Association. He's going to be at the courthouse, and he'll be speaking there, especially talking about this special session that's going to be coming up and things like that. So we want to invite anyone that's listening. Maybe you weren't planning to be there, but at 6 p.m. at the courthouse, Lawrence County Courthouse, Richard Archie with Tennessee Firearms Association is going to be there. And I'll have to slip out a few minutes early so I can get there in time. But I appreciate you having me over here, and I appreciate everything that 8 Oaks Recovery Center does. Number one, I appreciate the fact that they are a spiritual-based recovery, and I was wondering what kind of success you may have with the spiritual-based recovery.
You know, there's a lot of different studies that have looked into it, and spiritual recovery programs have much better success than secular-based, especially with folks, like a lot of folks in the South and in Middle Tennessee, Lawrenceburg area. They have they grew up in church at some level, and they had some exposure to it. So they have a basis for that, and a lot of secular programs, go away from that. And so if you build on a base that somebody already has when they get into trouble with addiction, it's helpful to build on something they already understand. And also addiction itself is, I don't know if you saw the movie Jesus Revolution, but it talks about a bunch of hippies that in the Southern California that they had a big revival.
Right.
Well, and in that movie, they actually talked about the subject you're talking about right now. And in that movie, they were looking for something. They went up to Haight-Ashbury and they didn't find it. And they started going to church and they did find what they were looking for. So a lot of folks get into addiction because they're looking for something, but that addiction doesn't have what they're looking for. So a lot of times a spiritual program fills that void in a person's life that they're looking for, but they don't know what they're looking for.
Well, how do you introduce them in as far as the spiritual aspect of it? If someone comes into 8 Oaks, I've wondered this. I've never been and actually toured 8 Oaks. I hope to get to do that sometime. But I was wondering how you would introduce someone to a spiritual aspect of it.
Well, we are very much a non-apologetic Christian program. So we take, and interesting is you if you look at 12 Steps and Big Book Alcoholics Anonymous, it is, if you read it and you're familiar with biblical principles, what they did was, when they wrote the Big Book and they started Alcoholics Anonymous, they took a lot of biblical principles and kind of dumbed them down so recovery would be available to everybody. And I think it's a good thing that they did that, because that's what their mission was. Their mission was to get as many people in recovery as possible, and people that didn't want to hear about Jesus or about God or about Christianity, they wanted the concepts of recovery. But if you really look at the Big Book Alcoholics Anonymous, it's Christian all through it.
Right.
So what we do is we just take it back to being Christian principles to help people stay in, get the concepts. And like I said, a lot of the folks we have, since they're coming from this area, have some sort of basis in Christian religion. So I think it's a good combination.
Good. Would you care if people call in? While we're
No,
on this?
I'd love to have people call in.
Phone number 766-9393 if you want to ask Jared a question. I'm in here learning. I think that the effects of drug substance abuse, alcoholism, we look at it through a political aspect with the Republican Party. I'm also a minister, so I look at it through the spiritual aspect as well. But I don't think it makes enough of the conversation on the political aspect. Seems like the only time you see folks who are trying to get legislation passed, trying to get things done, are the ones who have been victims to the substance abuse. And so I appreciate you're sharing your wealth of knowledge. You've been in this for how many years?
Probably about 30 years. I mean, it's pretty much all I've ever done is work in substance abuse.
Okay, all right. Because, there's a mental illness and substance abuse overlap. I mean, how does that work? Does it start off as mental illness and then go to substance abuse, or vice versa? If
you read the study that SAMHSA has done a ton of studies on mental illness and drug addiction, and about 80% of people that have a substance abuse issue have a mental illness as well. And often, there's always that question, what came first, the chicken or the egg? I mean, so sometimes you got someone with anxiety, depression, ADD, and they looking for something to make them feel normal.
Yeah.
So they start down the substance abuse route, and they get addicted. But then also there's other folks that maybe get into alcohol, marijuana, or depressants. Methamphetamine can cause meth-induced psychosis. So a lot of folks, maybe they started messing around with drugs, they got addicted, and then they hurt their brain. And to some degree, when you're treating them, the answer to the question is what came first is it doesn't matter. Because you're presented with a person that has a substance abuse issue and has a mental illness, and you have to treat both. And a lot of rehabs, especially a lot of Christian rehabs, don't really address mental illness. Like a lot of rehabs, you'll talk to them or you'll read stuff on their website and they'll say, well, we don't use medication, all that stuff. And the unfortunate thing is if 80% of the folks that have substance abuse have a co-occurring disorder, it just means they're ignoring that part of the issue. At Eight Oaks, we're not a medical facility, but we work with outside physicians. We have psychiatrists available. If somebody has depression, if someone has anxiety, we can make sure we get them on the right medication and make sure they're getting what they need going forward.
That's awesome. You and I do a lot of work with the Lawrence County Republican Party, and a couple of months ago, or last month rather, we had the Lawrence County Drug Prevention Coalition actually come in and do a Narcan training because we're seeing the effects of fentanyl, especially in this county. And I was just wondering, what right now, that's been about a month ago, have you had any feedback at all from that Narcan training or anything that we've done, or even from the Drug Coalition about that training?
Well, it was a great turnout. I mean, I think that they were probably surprised at how many people turned up for a Narcan training, and I think it's good that and it's a sad state of affairs where we need as many people in the community carrying Narcan around because hey, if somebody overdoses, and here's the thing, my philosophy, Eight Oaks' philosophy is we are not a big proponent of harm reduction. We want people we believe that recovery is available to everybody, but if somebody dies, they can't get treatment.
Right.
So a lot of folks in DC and folks that a lot of those things are pushed, and it's kind of like, well, we'll give people Narcan so they could use safely. That's really not where we're coming from. We're coming from, I want to keep you alive so we can get you into recovery. And I do believe that recovery is available to everybody. And so I think that tools like Narcan, it keeps people alive. And then there's also with fentanyl, especially in the powdered form, there's a possibility of an incidental exposure where someone isn't even a Narcan addict. And the other thing that Narcan could be good for is if you have an elderly loved one in your family and they're on some sort of opiate medication and they accidentally, they took their pills before they went to bed,
Right.
and then they stayed up for 2 hours and they're like, oh, I forgot to take my pills, and they take a double dose, they could accidentally. So there's accidental overdoses, and then there's people that, but for the most part, I mean, we used to talk about people overdosing on heroin. With fentanyl, we really look at it as fentanyl poisoning, because the thing is, even people that are using it as an illegal substance for the wrong reasons, they don't know what's in it. And they're not, and like they use the same amount they used the day before, but they die today because, this stuff isn't made in a pharmacy. It's made in a shed in Mexico,
That's correct. Yeah, they're not, these people trying to run little pharmaceutical companies in a lawnmower shed.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not becoming effective. The one thing that surprised me in that training that we did talking about fentanyl and so we could actually carry Narcan, and I personally have Narcan now, was I didn't realize there were laws already in place to protect individuals if they were to use Narcan or administer Narcan to someone that was possibly looked like or appeared to be on an overdose situation. I didn't realize there were laws in place to do that. How long is something like that? I didn't know a law existed, let me say it like this, to where you could use Narcan and then the person you administered the Narcan to could not take legal action against you, even if you didn't know them. I didn't know that it was in place.
I think some of that stuff was covered under the Good Samaritan law that's been around for quite some time, but there has been specific laws around Narcan. Like Narcan is, you don't need a prescription to get anymore. And just the opiate epidemic's been so bad, they've liberalized the access to Narcan. And the other thing with Narcan is it's really inert. Like if you gave Narcan, like if somebody had a heart attack and you gave them Narcan and started doing chest compressions, other than the 10 seconds later that you started the chest compressions, it's not going to hurt. There's no negative effect to somebody that isn't on opiate pain pills. Like if you or I, which I'm not going to recommend it, took Narcan right now, other than, I've never had it administered on me, but I understand it's a very bitter flavor. Other than a very bitter flavor going down the back of your throat, there's no negative effects on a normal, not on someone that's not on any kind of opiates.
Wow. Well, I know it's already, we've seen this epidemic coming across Lawrence County. We've talked about it. Have there been any more deaths since you and I talked last lately?
I have not talked to anybody over at the ambulance service, and those numbers are trailing. So, I had some numbers from January and February, but it takes a few weeks for those to come in, months, because what happens is a call might come out that there was a non-responsive person. Well, that's the call in the book. You know what I mean? And then the person goes to the hospital, and once the treatment is, a lot of that stuff's never updated back. So you kind of got to dig to get that information.
Yeah, it drags behind.
Yeah, it drags quite a bit.
Because I'm looking at a news article. This is Tennessee in Fayette County, 3 teen overdoses in Fayette County just before graduation. I think this was May 17th is the article, and their ages were 16 and 17. 2 of them died, and one of them sustained, some severe overdose symptoms. How common is this kind of thing with teenagers in schools?
Today, it's becoming, unfortunately, it's becoming more and more common. I mean, we had last year in the country, we had over 100,000 opiate overdose deaths. I mean, that's more people, that's in 1 year. That's more people than died in Vietnam, Korea, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and we have that happening every year in this country.
Say that one more time, because I'm trying to grab that. Yeah. I'm trying to put that number in my head. The 1 year
opiate death overdoses is greater than Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan deaths combined, and it's happening every year. The leading cause of death from, age 18 to 55 in America today is opiate overdose. It was auto accidents from the time Henry Ford started cranking it, probably from the 30s until the last 5 or 10 years, and about 5 or 6 years ago, it switched over to opiate overdoses. Last year, it was actually fentanyl overdose was the leading cause of death in the United States for 18 to 55-year-olds.
Well, I'm going to put this phone number out again because as we're talking about it, I feel like there's a lot of people that are reaching for help. They look for help. They look for it through churches and they look for it through other organizations. So this phone number is 766-9393. If someone had a personal story, I think that's kind of what sparks the conversation. You have to have a personal story, even yourself, your personal story, how you got into this. And once you're in it, it seems like you have the old saying, skin in a game, and you want to get other people out of this. You see the amount of evil that comes from having an addiction like this, how it destroys your life, it destroys your family. And I would like to hear someone call in and have some comments on this or questions.
And that's really where we want to go with this show. If folks in the community are having issues with just an anonymous question, you don't have to tell us who you are. If there's something going on in your family and you go, what does this mean? Where should I turn? That's what we're here for, and 8 Oaks is not going to be the answer for every caller. We're not just here. This isn't a commercial for 8 Oaks. There's going to be different answers for different folks, and we want to help people. We want to be a resource in the community to find the right direction. And hey, my goal is I'd love to see, let's not need drug rehab. Working on prevention, working on interdiction to keep this stuff out of our. You talk about 3 kids overdosing at a high school. In a rural high school. Not that it's not tragic anywhere it happens,
sure.
But when you hear this stuff happen in Memphis or Nashville or Huntsville, you go, oh, it's a big city. You're talking Fayetteville.
It's Fayette County.
Fayette County.
Yep.
But that's an area that looks just like Lawrenceburg.
It does.
It's not somebody else's problem someplace else. It is coming, right here. You know what I mean?
Well, we can't ignore it. We don't want to wait until we have teenagers on graduation night and have a situation like that and just devastate this community. This is a tight-knit community.
Yeah.
People are neighbors, they're friends, they go to church together, they play ball together. And to see something like that with 3 or 4 deaths simultaneously would be devastating to this community. I know that. And I don't want to take a judgmental approach. And I think the old school way of thinking, maybe I'm even guilty of it. I'll confess that, used to think, oh, that person's just a user, or, they have the cliche names. And sometimes it's even slanderous, some of the things that people would say to someone who would be an addict or addicted. But prescription opioids were marked by pharmaceutical companies as harmless and non-habit forming. And they were sold and administered that way. And now we're seeing like a backlash, or I don't know, it's almost like a tidal wave is hitting us all at once of these opioid addictions. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, what you're talking about is that fits right into the lawsuit that was filed against the manufacturers of OxyContin when they first. They had pharmaceutical reps going out to doctors saying, hey, this stuff's time release, it's not addictive. And they actually push doctors into and incentivize doctors to write prescriptions for OxyContin. And the thing is, obviously they lied because they lost a $5 billion lawsuit. And, and they're taking that family's name off of universities that they donated money to and all kinds of stuff because it was promoted. And I've seen it. I've worked in the drug addiction. I'll have 30 years in recovery myself in September, and I've worked
That's
in this.
Awesome.
I've worked around addiction for 25 plus years, and the thing is, I've seen it time and again. I've seen it with Tramadol. They said it wasn't addictive. They said OxyContin wasn't addictive, and every few years they come up with something. But I will tell you, I have done this for, like I said, most of my adult life. I've worked in drug addiction. And, when I first got in it, there was, you had methamphetamines. And like you'd see waves where methamphetamines would come in and cocaine would come in and heroin would come in. But like methamphetamines, yes, it has subsided some in the last few years, but it hasn't went away. And this opiate thing has just built. It started with the OxyContin and the pill mills, in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then it went to, then they cracked down on the pill mills. and the illegal fentanyl and the illegal oxycontins just kind of, and heroin just kind of backfilled right behind that. And it's at levels, and I've, like I said, I've worked this forever. And, you work in the industry, everyone goes, "Oh, it's worse than it's ever been." You know what? In addiction, it's worse than it's worse than it ever been. Like, there is more access to this stuff. It's cheaper. It's, there was a day that everybody that was a heroin addict used hypodermic needles.
Yeah.
Because it was expensive. Like, if you were a heroin addict, you were spending $200 or $300 a day on heroin and using a hypodermic needle, which is obviously a faster mean of getting in your blood, so you needed less to get the same high.
Right.
Today, it's so cheap, it's so plentiful, that I'm not saying people don't end up there, but it's a lot easier to get in because it's so much cheaper. People are snorting it, people are taking it, they take the pills, the fentanyl and pills and stuff. And since it is so much more accessible, that barrier of using the hypodermic needle, people go, "Why didn't nobody ever do that?" Well, nobody starts there.
Right.
That's
exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get on these pathway drugs, and then it seems like it just opens up the next door and the next door. And we've all seen that in our families. We've all been, I don't know anyone that's not been impacted by this. Talking about it being non-habit forming, I love history. And to think that they would try to sell this product as non-habit forming, knowing it comes from a poppy plant. How did that ever get off the ground?
I guess they got lots of lobbyists, and they get their point of view across. But it did come back to bite them. I mean, like I said, they lost not that the money matters. I mean, you can't. They took all their money, and you can't close Pandora's box.
Right.
You know what I mean? But it did. And if you look at what they did, is in many ways it was much more insidious than even the tobacco companies. You could say the tobacco companies knew that their product caused cancer. They did at some point,
sure,
but they won't react. These pharmaceutical companies, they knew day one what they were doing.
Yeah, the poppy plant has been an addictive substance for maybe 200 years. I don't know. I mean, if you look back in history,
the opiate wars in China.
Yeah. I mean, they almost destroyed China with this stuff 150 years ago.
Isn't that ironic? And China is sending fentanyl to America today.
I
don't want to get too much into
I know.
politics and conspiracy theories.
Well, you got a political guy here. You don't want to talk politics. I don't know how you're going to navigate that water. Because I got another point that I wanted to bring up, and the reason why I try to bring it in on the political side is, we know a lot of our neighbors, and maybe they're elderly, maybe they're senior citizens, and they're not out and about quite as much. Now, younger folks, this younger generation, they're more aware. They see it, they're more linked in on social media and different things like that. But I think a lot of our older folks, a lot of our older voting citizens here in the community, they may not be aware of the severity of the problem. I was just looking up some things before we came into this meeting, and substance abuse costs Tennessee taxpayers over $3 billion per year.
And you know what? I would actually argue that there's so many unquantifiable costs with substance abuse. I mean, that's days off work, that's accidents,
right.
But here's my question is, when a kid's dad doesn't come home for dinner, what does that cost the community? I mean, seriously, and you have that going on for a decade, and that kid goes down the wrong path. You know what I mean? Not having dad sit at the dinner table because, and hey, alcohol's a drug. You know what I mean? I'm not some purist that says no one can drink, no one can do anything. I'm in recovery. I don't do that. But what I'm saying is, if a guy's out drinking every night after work and not going home to his family, that isn't in that $3 billion.
That's right.
You know what I mean? The $3 billion is hard costs. People causing accidents, people not showing up for work, people getting fired from jobs, people stealing. So the cost of addiction, and here's the reality. Every person listening this evening can attest to this. SAMHSA, the part of the federal government, does research on drug and alcohol addiction. They say that 100% of the population in the United States has a negatively impacted because of addiction. And what that means is your brother, your sister, your husband, your kids, your mom, your dad, or your coworker. You go to work every day. Well, you know what? If the guy that's your partner at work don't show up because he was drunk last night, you got to pick up the slack. You know what I mean? Or one of your employees isn't doing what they're supposed to do, you got to deal with him in an HR manner. So 100% of folks, that's what Samson says, 100% of people are negatively impacted because of addiction. And then you got major impacts. I mean, you got direct loved ones, or God forbid somebody gets a family member hurt in a DUI accident or something. Now those are the major ones that you think of, but you don't think about, like I said, like your coworker shows up late, your coworker don't show up. You're dealing with all that stuff, and that all adds to that. And like I said, I think that those numbers are always underestimated because there's so much stuff you can't quantify.
All right. Well, what else is Eight Oaks doing locally in the county? Maybe outreach stuff that maybe I don't even know about.
Well, Eight Oaks, David Morgan, through United Church started Eight Oaks about 8 or 9 years ago. And they started with doing community stuff at the jails, at the jails they actually have recovery meetings at the jail for men and women.
Right.
And on Monday night we have a community meeting at the church that's free to the community, and they've been doing that for about 7-8 years. In the last 2 years, we started a outpatient office with sober living. And we can take people, they can live at the sober living, they go to get outpatient. It's kind of like your classic 28-day treatment, but we try to get 28 to 45 days for folks. We take all major health insurances, we take some TennCare, we're working on that, we're getting some state grants. Like I said, on that side of the program, we're fairly new, but we're trying to help as many folks as we can. And to me, it's just heartbreaking to see what's going on in the community. And can I help everybody with every issue? No, but it's like if you can help that one, you made a big difference to that one. So, and that's what we're trying to do. And like I said, we're also a resource. I mean, if somebody calls us up and they have an issue, if it's a female, or if it's somebody whose insurance we can't take, or it's somebody, like if somebody calls up and says, you know what, I had a bad experience in church 10 years ago, and I just can't do that. You know what, that's okay. We'll try to help you get into some place, because if we're delivering a message to somebody, we absolutely believe that Christian drug rehab has the most success.
Right.
But if we got an individual that called us up and said, hey, I got, my 23-year-old son hates church, and if you start that stuff with him, he's not going to be able to hear, you know what, let's get him clean, and maybe once he gets clean, then maybe we can work on the church side. You know what I mean? Like, get the substance out of them, and then maybe we can, because I still want to see him get that as well. But maybe he needs to get clean first. Maybe we'll get him to a secular program. Like, the less people using this stuff, the better off we are. And like I said, anybody that calls us, we are going to try to find them. We're going to try to find them some sort of direction. Like I said, people can call here tonight. We can help them. People can call our 800 number. It's on our website. You can call me on my cell phone.
Yeah, if you want to call in now, it's 766-9393. If you've got a question, or if someone like tonight were to be listening and are thinking about a loved one or a friend maybe that needs this type of rehabilitation, recovery center help, and they were to call Eight Oaks, what would be the path? I mean, how would that look? If they picked up the phone and called the 1-800 number right now, what would it look like from that point forward?
If they called, I'll give you the number. It's actually a 931 number, 560-4272, 560-4272. If somebody called, what we would do is, obviously we would talk to them and find out what kind of substances they were on, or what kind of substance their loved one was on. And what we would do is we would assess, obviously, if they're appropriate for our facility. If the person needed a detox, we are not a licensed detox in the state of Tennessee. We have detoxes we work with. If they needed a detox, like if they were on fentanyl or alcohol, we would make sure they got their detox, got stabilized medically, and then once they got cleared, both of the detoxes we work with primarily are hospital based, and once they got cleared, they would come into the program. And our program it's 7 days a week. They live at the house. They go do groups, and that is the thing. Like, in putting Eight Oaks together and putting the schedule together, just to give you guys a little bit of my background, I worked in secular drug rehab for most of my life. I built one of the largest rehabs in the country called American Addiction Centers, and we were a secular rehab. And one of the things that when I started talking to David Morgan about helping him grow this facility was one of the things that was missing is there's a lot of Christian drug rehabs that are very Christian. I'll give you an example. Probably the biggest one that most people have heard of is the Salvation Army. The Salvation Army is primarily a drug rehab. And what they do is they get folks, and here's the thing. There are people that waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, reading the Bible for 2 hours, and then going and having a structured day all day, and then going out and minister at night. That is helpful. Like if you're a homeless person that has no structure in your life and doing that for 18 to 24 months, that's what you need.
Yeah.
The unfortunate thing is, first off, if you're a school teacher, a truck driver, or whatever, first off, that's not even an option. Like you got 3 kids, you're a truck driver, you're making a living, you just have a substance abuse problem. So what happens is you go, well, man, I'd really like to go to Christian rehab. Most of Christian rehabs, Teen Challenge, Salvation Army, they're 18 months, 24 months. And the other thing is, there's kind of a distance between the Christian side and the secular side. So a lot of the Christian programs go, well, we don't want therapists here. We don't want the government we don't want to get licensed. We don't want the government to tell us what to do.
Right.
Well, the thing is, fortunately, we're in the state of Tennessee, and all we had to do to say is, hey, we're a Christian rehab, but we want license. All they had to say is, well, somebody comes to you and says, I don't want to go to Christian rehab. What are you going to do? We go, you know what? We got the phone number to Bradford. We got the phone number to Buffalo Valley. Like, they're comparable programs. So that's the thing. We're state licensed. We're JACO accredited, and what JACO accreditation is, that's the same accreditation that a hospital has to interface with insurance. So that's what allows us to bill the insurance. But the thing that makes us different than most Christian programs is we actually have clinical staff. Like we have clinical licensed therapists. They are Christian, and because we're a Christian program, they're free to help you understand your pathway through Christian principles. Like,
that's great. Yeah.
Bringing it back to biblical, like we do groups just like a Cumberland Heights or a Bradford would, but instead of going, well, we tie it back to the biblical. And hey, come on, let's be honest. The best book ever written. I mean, what's been written since then? You know what I mean? It's just
right.
It's just been rewritten, and even you watch a sitcom on TV and you go, oh, I recognize that story.
Sure. Yeah. Stories rewritten about the Bible.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So a lot of stuff in therapy, you go, oh, wait a second. You mean talking about treating people right and talking about this? You're like, man, where'd that come from? You know what I mean? So, but we can tie it right back to there. Our therapists are all Christian folks. A lot of our drug and alcohol counselors actually worked in ministry. So we can tie that all together. But like I said, what makes us unique is if someone's looking for Christian drug rehab, they want that Christ-centered program, but they don't need to go someplace for 18 months. And the other thing is, if they have depression, anxiety, and that's the thing, we're not a psych ward. Like you said, if somebody called us up today and said, hey, I got a son that suffers from severe schizophrenia. Hey, I'm going to help that person out, and I'm going to help them find the right placement.
Right.
We're not the place. You know what I mean? And like I also said, we're not a medical program. If someone needs a detox and they got complicated medical issues, we're not the place.
How many days I mean, because I don't know. I'm asking a question because how many days does it take to do a typical detox? I guess the severity of the use would be
most
different.
Most detoxes anywhere 3 to 7 days. Now, not that you see a lot of benzodiazepines today, like you see a lot of Xanax. Xanax is pretty complicated, and that can go up to like 20 days. But for the most part, if somebody goes, we use hospital-based detoxes, and the doctors have them stabilized within 5 to 7 is average. Like 3 would kind of be short. And that's the other thing. If somebody's on a stimulant, like if someone's on methamphetamine, they just need to sleep. Like, you know what I mean? Like they might sleep for 24 hours,
right? But
there isn't like a physical withdrawal. Alcohol, this is something that's interesting. And when I first got in the industry, it's very interesting. Alcohol detox is the only detox that can kill a healthy individual. So say you got 35-year-old guy, physically fit, in great shape. He stops drinking. You know, he's drinking 2/5 a day.
Yep.
The detox itself can kill him. Now, opiates, if you've had 3 heart attacks, you got hardening of the arteries, you're 65 years, or you're 50 years old and fat like me, it could kill you. But like you take a 28-year-old healthy guy on opiates, he will be sick as you possibly can. Like I've picked up many addicts from jail 2 or 3 days into an opiate detox with no medication, and they might feel like they're going to die.
It's just dope. They call it dope sick.
Yeah, they're dope sick. It's severe flu-like symptoms. It's the worst flu-like symptoms that you could possibly experience. That's what an opiate detox looks like. But if you're a healthy individual, it won't kill you. Alcohol detox is the most dangerous. So, like I said, if someone called us up and they're like, I'm drinking 2/5 a day, we're going to send those folks over to the hospital, and like we're going to go with what the doctor said at the hospital. They're there 5 days, 7 days. That's realistic. They may come off with prescription meds to kind of keep them comfortable and something to keep their blood pressure under control and stuff like that. And we're going to go with whatever the doctors say. But yeah, it's regularly 5 to 7 days.
Yeah, and when you mentioned alcohol detox, personally, that's something that's kind of close to me. We've had family members in my family die from alcohol detox, trying to come off of alcohol. And so a lot of people, I think, probably dealing with a lot of youth and people in the community, and of course being related with church things, they think they got it under control and they can quit anytime they want to, and they may even try. But I think for me, saying this out loud to people, that in a non-judgmental way, to approach a Christian-based, Christian-centered, a recovery center with people who are dedicated there in a non-judgmental way. I've met firsthand people who have come through the recovery program, and I mean, it has changed families. I know that 8 Oaks, I don't want to say their names here. You know who I'm talking about. There's a few of them.
Yeah, please don't say anything.
Yeah, I'm not going to say anything. But even the people I'm thinking about probably wouldn't even care if I did, because it changed their life to that degree. And, just hearing their own personal testimony and seeing their family members and siblings and things celebrating their recovery, life-changing event. It saves people's lives. 8 Oaks has absolutely saved people's lives.
Well, I thank for saying that. That's what we're here to do, and there's a lot of stuff going on. It's interesting you talk about the judgmental part of addiction. I would give credit to the doctor that gave this at a seminar, if I could remember his name, but I just want to tell everyone this is not an original quip. But there was a doctor that we were talking about, is addiction a disease? You know what I mean? And a lot of folks go, no, it's a moral weakness. You know what I mean? Like, you just can't. And so here's what this doctor said in this speech one time, and it kind of solidified in my picture of my head of what it is. He said, if somebody had cancer and you put a gun to their head and you told them you have to stop having cancer, I'm going to shoot you. Obviously, you would have to shoot them, because they can't stop that.
Correct.
You can't stop having diabetes. You can't stop having cancer. You can't control that.
That's right.
If you went to a heroin addict and you had heroin sitting on the table and you put a gun to their head and you said, if you pick that heroin up, I am going to shoot you, they could not pick the heroin up. But if you said to them, if you can't stop desiring the heroin, I am going to shoot you. The addiction is the overwhelming desire to use.
Yes.
That's what the addiction is. That does not excuse you from your behavior and acting on that. But the overwhelming desire to use, you cannot control. You can't logic your way out of it. You can't think your way out of it. You know what I mean?
Right.
You have to learn tools, and that's what rehab's all about. Rehab is about giving people the tools to deal with and to reduce over time, hopefully, that overwhelming desire to use. But that's what the disease is. The disease is, I want to do this more than anything else in my life.
Right.
And that's what the disease concept of addiction is. And like I said, the disease concept does not in my eyes. Maybe some folks might go, oh well, yeah, they were addicted. It wasn't their fault. No, your actions are you're responsible for your actions.
Absolutely.
But that desire, everybody walking around the street doesn't have that desire. That person is afflicted with an overwhelming desire, and that is here's the thing. If you look at diabetes is a chronic disease, right?
That's correct.
So is addiction. Addiction is a primary illness, and it's potentially fatal. It's the same and it's progressive. All chronic diseases, they're primary illnesses, they're progressive and potentially fatal. And that's what addiction is. Addiction is a disease. It's a primary mental illness.
Yep.
It's progressive. It gets worse and worse and worse and worse, and it is potentially fatal. And that's the reality of addiction, you know.
Last week, unrelated to this particular show and coming on here with you, didn't know we were going to be doing this together, but I actually was talking to the folks that do the recovery court here in Lawrence County. And so probably there's a lot of people in Lawrence County don't even know what the recovery court is. I didn't know, but they actually have a court here in Lawrence County. It's after hours court. I'm sure you're very familiar with it. You probably know about it. But the judge for that court was actually saying how he was actually teaching a group, and I was in the group that was being taught by the judge, and he said that what he does is Lawrence County Court, he said, I have to reward them in the court process because they have trained their brain to only operate on the reward system. And the way he was explaining it, and I'll fail miserably at doing it, but I want to relay it to those people who may be listening, is that's why we see drug addicts make horrible decisions. You know, you see even the crime rate goes up, and you're like, a person stole. You know, I used to think about, Jared, why would somebody walk into a gas station and do an armed robbery for $40? And it's because they're trying to work the reward portion of their brain, and they're not working the problem solving. And he was talking about how they actually, in the court system, have to jumpstart that process of basic problem solving because all they've done for years is reward portion of their brain, dopamine in the brain, and using opioids, methamphetamines, different things. It was an eye-opening experience for me talking about how they do it. And it was literally to the point. And people may laugh about this, but I think it shows the severity of it, where the judge would actually come down off the stand and give them a chocolate chip cookie if they could pass a drug test. And he said they were so upset about that if they failed a drug test, they would go sit down. And we're talking adults, some 30, 40, 50-year-old people would sit down in the courtroom, and he said, and they're just steaming angry because they didn't get the chocolate chip cookie. But it's one cookie. We're not even talking a pack of cookies.
Well, we could do a whole show next week, maybe on we call that adultolescence, but we get about a 40-year-old feeling that way. That's actually an adultolescent.
But you would see a child that would have the reward system in their brain that way, and they're trying to jumpstart things. We're having to think outside the box because we're being hit with problems and situations that have not been with former generations before. If you're having an all-time high of opioid overdose and addiction problems, then we're going to have to start thinking outside the box to solve the problem. So I didn't know how much you worked with the recovery court, but I found that very interesting.
We work with everybody we can. We work with probation. We work with the Lawrence County Drug Coalition. They're great to work with. Probation's great to work with. We've got folks from the recovery court. I mean, we're all in this together, and it's a mess. And I wish I had all the answers. If I did, you know what I mean, I would do it, but we're just trying to do our part and trying to help as many folks as we can. I think Charlotte says she has a question over there.
Yes, someone typed a question, and they said, what support do you provide family members while they're in treatment, and what about family participation after the person has completed rehab?
We actually do have family group with our rehab. And we also have family individual sessions as well. And I do believe that our therapist would do ongoing family work if the family was interested in that. And we would also refer the family to groups like Al-Anon. If people aren't familiar with that, Al-Anon is kind of the counterpart to Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous for family members on dealing with a loved one with substance abuse issues. And anyone that's listening tonight, if they have a family member with substance abuse issues, Al-Anon is actually a great resource because you can go to Al-Anon even if you're in a relationship with somebody with substance abuse problems. And when I say relationships, I mean it could be your spouse, it could be your kid, it could be your parents. And the thing is, what they work on is they work on having boundaries. Like you can't make someone else get clean. And if you're,
That's correct.
Maybe if it's your spouse, you might have to end the relationship, and you might not. But if it's your kid or your parents, you're stuck with them forever. And going to Al-Anon is a great resource on how to manage your boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And you can keep redirecting them back to treatment. But like, if you have an adult child and they won't go, the thing with Al-Anon is they will work with you so you don't enable them further.
Jared, I appreciate you having me on. I always learn a lot in all these conversations, and I'm thinking that Eight Oaks Recovery is going to be something that's going to be here in Lawrence County. I'm glad it's available here. It's a resource I think a lot of people should reach out to, and I'm glad for what you do in a volunteer realm. And I see it. I know what you do as volunteers. I know what David Morgan's done as volunteers, and a lot of some folks I don't even know their names. And I appreciate that. We appreciate what people do in this community, and I think it will pay off. And you may not be able to change the world or change. So one person can't change the world, but if you could change the world for one.
There's
the
what
answer.
We're doing it one at a time.
Yeah, if you can do it one at a time. And I hate to slip out, but we do have a meeting at 6 o'clock. So if anybody wants to join us at the courthouse at 6 o'clock, we'd love to have you.
Well, it's being Charlotte here, Charlotte. We got 15 more minutes. Let's talk about. Do we have any more questions over there?
They haven't come in yet, but yes. So, I mean, that's a very interesting program, and, you've really educated me, and I've been here for several years as well. How long has Eight Oaks been out there?
Eight Oaks has been around for about 8 years, and we've been doing we had the treatment part where we have the licensed, accredited treatment and the housing for just around 2 years right now. And something else that I think would be interesting for the folks in Lawrence County probably about a month and a half ago, the Drug and Alcohol Coalition had a meeting over at the Baptist Church, and they brought a gentleman in that was a law enforcement agent from Colorado.
Okay.
And he talked about what happened in Colorado, a decade down the road after legalizing marijuana. And the things a lot of folks don't understand. I mean, I'm 50 years old. I got 30 years clean, so everybody can, I have 30 years, God willing, in September. I don't want to give myself any credit for anything I haven't earned yet. But, so 29 plus years I have in recovery. And so the thing is, it's been a long time since I've been exposed to any marijuana. And it was a very interesting topic because we'll get calls into Eight Oaks, and I've worked at other rehabs in my lifetime, and people say, well, I think my kid's just using marijuana. Well, they're old like me, you know what I mean? And they don't understand that the marijuana today is it's not like twice as good or bad,
right.
Twice as strong. It's not twice as strong as it was when we were kids. It's like exponentially, like 50, 80, 100 times more potent when it comes to the THC level than it was when we were kids. You know what I mean? And I know a lot of folks my age, have probably used marijuana.
Our age.
Our age.
Now, I pride myself on not have ever smoked marijuana.
Very good.
But
you and my wife are the only two people that I think,
Well, but I do want you to touch on something right quick, because my kids, one of my children, are into vapes, and somebody's like, "Oh, I can't believe she's 25." Okay, my kid is not small, so tell us a little bit of difference between. I don't know if it was me and you or me and the sheriff. We were talking about marijuana vapes yesterday. So tell us a little bit of difference nowadays between the marijuana vapes, THC or whatever, and marijuana.
Well, the vapes are. I mean, that's the other thing.
Because I
is-
think a lot of people don't really know the difference.
like you literally.
And it opened my eyes. I went through the Sheriff's Academy, Police Academy last year, and I had no clue. Like you said, we're both 50, and I had no clue.
I'll tell you what. When I went to that thing with the guy from Colorado, and like I said, I've been doing this for 30. I learned all kinds of stuff there. Like the stuff is changing fast, but the vapes. I mean, here's the thing: if you have an adult child that's vaping and they have a Joel, they're probably it doesn't have THC in it. But any of this stuff with the liquids that they're adding themselves, there's a pretty high likelihood. I mean, a lot of that stuff has and that's the thing, the Delta 8, it's a synthetic THC, so it's not illegal. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's a Delta 7, there's a Delta 8, and then there's the THC vapes that they're bringing in, and it's much, much stronger. So you could be at Kroger and you could see somebody out in the parking lot take a hit off a vape, and you don't think nothing of it. Or you could have an employee. I mean, you could have an employee that goes out on their smoke break, and you think, oh, okay, there's like 3 guys having Marlboros and a couple people back there with their vapes. You don't know what's in that vape, and it doesn't smell different. You know what I mean? It all smells like cherry and
you're talking about the gummies. There is a huge difference between the gummies.
Oh yeah,
the edibles, if people don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Between these edibles, between Delta 7 and Delta 10, I mean, huge difference. And I mean, a lot of times there's, you can buy them for pain, you can buy them for pleasure, you can buy them for all kinds of reasons. And everybody's got a different reason. And so, I had bought some of those for pain. Went down and bought some. And like Delta 8, I guess I'd bought them and didn't see any kind of reaction, none. And so, because I was trying to do the holistic approach, and then, and so I guess my doctor had said that they just don't work on some people the same way. And so, is that bad that I just said that?
No.
And so, but I guess everybody's
illegal.
But everybody's body chemistry is different.
Definitely, you don't know how you're going to react to whatever you get. Especially with kids. I mean, with kids, one kid might have bought an edible and been like, "Oh, this hardly did anything." Another kid might have serious problems. And I'm not trying to be an alarmist, and and I know.
But I'm alarmed.
Yeah.
And
well, the thing is, though, and it's kind of like, we don't want to go back to the 1940 reefer madness stuff, but I will tell you the conversations I have with my kids. I have 2 teenage.
Okay, that is an EMS alert saying that there is something's not good, but I don't know how to shut it off. See, I told you we should be alarmed, Jared.
We're alarmed. Be very alarmed.
I mean, that's maybe a sign from the Lord that we should be alarmed. But I mean, you think I'm kidding, but I am.
Well,
I'm
the thing is,
concerned.
especially with the fentanyl being mixed in with so much stuff, a kid.
And to me, I'm alarmed because I cannot even tell you, like, you can touch something that's got fentanyl in it.
Yeah.
And it can kill you.
That happened there was an Airbnb, I think it was in North Carolina, and like a 3-year-old touched something on the floor and they died of a fentanyl overdose.
Okay. So, as someone who deals a lot with this kind of thing, so people are getting drugs that has fentanyl mixed in with it?
Actually, the more things I go to, like Brandon was saying the other day, we had the Drug Coalition come and do that fentanyl training. 70 or 80% of all illegal drugs right now on the street, and I'm talking marijuana, cocaine, heroin, has fentanyl mixed in with it. And you'd go, well, why would you do that? Well, here's the thing. Fentanyl is super cheap. Super, super, super unbelievably cheap coming across the border. It is incredibly accessible. Well, if you're the drug dealer and you mix fentanyl in, fentanyl is also highly addictive.
Yes.
So if you put fentanyl on the marijuana you sell, say you're in a state like Colorado or California where recreational marijuana is legal, if someone buys illegal marijuana from you and it has fentanyl on it,
makes me want more marijuana.
It makes you want more of your marijuana.
Yes.
And so the thing is, it's a very common practice today that fentanyl, and it's also it's very cheap and you get a high from it. So like even if you're not the big picture drug dealer where you're like, oh, I'm going to put this fentanyl on to get people hooked. The thing is, you want to sell the best, the strongest. If you sell marijuana to someone, you want them to go, man, I got really, really.
So they're not the ones putting the bad fentanyl in it. It's just every
Well,
once in a while.
it ain't the bad fentanyl, the good fentanyl. Fentanyl, I think it's like 3 or 4 grains of fentanyl can kill you. Well, these people aren't pharmaceutical experts.
So they're making some bad batches.
Well, they just put too much on.
Okay.
I mean, fentanyl is like you have to get a little wee bit or you die. Like fentanyl, the only legal way to get fentanyl is a prescription drug. And the only legal delivery system that I'm aware of, and this may have changed since I read this a few years back, but the only 2 legal ways to take fentanyl, like it's mainly for terminally ill cancer patients, which, hey, you know what? I'm not opposed to it in that incident. But the only 2 legal ways of delivery is a patch and a lollipop. Because fentanyl is so potent that the pharmaceutical companies don't make it into pills.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing is, when you got, Joe the drug dealer mixing it up in a storage shed in, wherever,
right.
he probably isn't. And so what happens is, that's why the terminology is changing to fentanyl poisoning instead of fentanyl overdose. Because if you're smoking pot, you don't even think you're getting fentanyl.
Right.
And so you've literally been poisoned.
It's not like I'm going out to buy fentanyl.
Yeah, it's not like it's not like, hey man, can I have some of that pot with fentanyl in it? So,
right.
But, I mean, hey, I will tell you though, in the sick world we live in, that often a lot of times what happens in a city is, say a bad batch of fentanyl gets out, people will actually seek that out. Because what they say is, oh, well, that other guy was a punk. He couldn't handle it. I want the strong stuff. And so that's why a lot of times you'll see, like, thank God we haven't had anything like that happen locally, but you'll see, like, there'll be a bad batch of fentanyl in Nashville and a bunch of people will keep dying for weeks. Addicts actually seek that out because they're like, man, that must be really good stuff.
Oh. That's just horrible.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't sure exactly how. I'm like, fentanyl, they overdose on fentanyl. Why would they go buy fentanyl?
Well, like I said, if you're...
I mean, but that makes a lot of sense.
It gets them addicted to their product. It also makes their product give a more intense high. And obviously, if you're buying illegal drugs...
You're looking for the high.
That's what you're looking for.
Yeah.
So if this guy's marijuana gives you more of a high than that guy, you're going to go, oh man, this guy's getting some really good marijuana. Where, no, actually, he's just sprinkling like fentanyl on it. And like I said, it's so ridiculously cheap. I mean, you're talking like, and the thing is, a kilo of fentanyl can kill like, I don't know, I've read like 20,000, 30,000. Like there's enough fentanyl to kill that. So the thing is, like, they have to dilute it down. And that's the thing, like back in the day, with cocaine or heroin, obviously people were looking for as pure of drugs as they could get, right?
Right.
Today, like, you have to make sure that the people that sold it to you have diluted it enough or you will die.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, all right. You got 1 minute. What do you want to say to everybody?
Well, I want to say if anybody needs help with drug addiction, they can call 931-560-4272, and that is the number for 8 Oaks, and we are available to help people. And like I said, just because you're not looking for male drug inpatient rehab, don't stop that from calling us. We will help you with placement or any questions you have, and that's what we're here for, as a community resource.
The last question I got in was, with all the new substances out there, do you think tobacco is still a gateway to all substances abuses out there, or drug addiction?
Is tobacco? Well, I think it. As somebody, I do smoke cigars, so I might be the wrong person to ask. I got a full disclosure here.
Well,
but
you said you're clean of drugs,
yeah.
But you don't do drugs anymore. So I mean, I don't know.
But what I would say is, I would say that the barrier. Actually, you know what? I have a much better answer for that question. But I do
Okay.
want to disclose that I do smoke cigars. But the one thing I do want to say is there has been a lot of studies that show that if you put somebody in recovery and you get them to quit smoking, they're if they smoke their drugs, so if they were smoking marijuana, smoking crack, smoking cocaine, if you can get them to stop smoking, it lowers that barrier to going back, and the recovery rates are about 40 to 50% higher. So I would say, if I'm an abstinence-based guy, so the less stuff you do like that, the less likely you are to do the next thing. And honestly, I'll be honest, I'll tell you, that's alcohol too. Like somebody in recovery like myself, like I don't drink, and so I think that once someone's had an addiction problem, they probably shouldn't do anything.
Well, all right. I think that's very, very much a lot of information for us all to soak in. So, it was great having you on the show tonight. Look forward to what information you have for us next time. So, thanks for being here.
All right. Thank you.
Great show. Thank you.